Hi, I'm Stacey. I am a lead workday instructor within Deloitte UK, and I'm also a member of Neurodiversity in business.
I'm Dr Madison Koch, scientific doctor, not an actual doctor, and I'm a senior experimental officer doing science on focused ion beams at the University of Manchester.
And we're married and we are both dyslexic. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like to have dyslexia and also to be in a dyslexic relationship. So we're going to go through some questions, and the first one is how our dyslexia presents itself in ourselves. So I'll go first. Aside from the obvious spelling and grammar problems, I find it hard sometimes to comprehend text. So when things are written, trying to detract the meaning from that. I work much better when there's a story behind the text, or at least I can make a story or have time to create stories to words. So I do a lot of reading via Audible instead of by books themselves. And obviously that translates into work sometimes. So if people send me long emails without a follow-up call or a discussion, sometimes it's quite hard for me to grasp the meaning there. My brain also goes a bit scatty sometimes. I don't like really using that word, but I do get a bit lost at times. So, case example, I've got myself a little bit lost now from the question, but sometimes I struggle to sort of keep on track with things. I need a bit of a help just to make sure I'm staying on track.
So mine for the self, kind of very typically, it's a lot of spelling, a lot of comprehension, a lot of processing speeds. So very similar, kind of reading long documents, long scientific papers can often take a really long time. And also sending emails, I'll construct an email probably about 5 or 6 times before it actually gets sent, just because sometimes I'm not sure if it actually makes sense or not. So that's kind of the general ways that mine presents.
Right, so next question is, could you tell us a bit more about your diagnosis of being diagnosed with dyslexia?
I was diagnosed when I was in year 6, and basically my parents had to go externally from my school because my school didn't think that I had dyslexia, so we had to find someone to diagnose me outside of the school system. I was very lucky that I did. Me and all my siblings got diagnosed, and we basically were told we were the most typical dyslexics that you kind of ever can see on the big bell curve that there is. We sat right at the far corner, and they were like, it's definitely the dyslexic. Then obviously through my secondary school, the school didn't really want to know about it much, and then at university I had a bit of support, mainly with exams, but that was pretty much it, and that's kind of been my diagnosis journey so far.
Yeah, so you're quite lucky getting diagnosed in year 6, so...
Yeah. My parents really pushed for it because they kind of could see all the telltale signs, and I'm very good at maths and science, but I was in the lowest spelling set and reading set, and to them it was obvious, but to the school they didn't want to know, sadly.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a common story with many people we speak to about dyslexia. So the same with me. I was also probably very obviously dyslexic at school. In primary school, I had extra sessions in my first years for reading and writing because I just wasn't grasping words. So they'd have all these sort of special sessions for me. They also held me back in my class for 1 year. So I was sort of with the slower people, as they would sort of call us. But unfortunately, they just, regardless of that, they just didn't clock that I was dyslexic. And I went through secondary school with the same situation, and actually at secondary school, because they wouldn't believe that I was dyslexic, because I would get such high grades, again, quite strong in things like science, really not strong at all in English, they just thought I was being lazy, disruptive, and to be honest, I actually became a bit disruptive because I was so frustrated that people weren't listening, that I needed that support. Eventually, after my GCSEs, so I had to go through my GCSEs with no support at all, which was really tough. I was given a dyslexia test in my A-levels, and I was given the extra time and support. I say support, not really much support, but extra time. And that translated, luckily, into university, which was a much better experience with support. And and now into adulthood, definitely some support in the workplace. Alright, so a little bit more questions about, are there any challenges of being dyslexic in your relationship? So I guess, yeah, it's quite funny being both dyslexic in a relationship, because we do share similar traits with certain things, so we both can get a bit lost, especially when it comes to reading plans and things like that. So one of the biggest challenges is probably communication, because dyslexia often presents itself with difficulties in comprehension and language. So sometimes we can struggle to find the best ways to communicate, because dyslexia presents itself very differently in both of us. So Madison's very, very good as a coping mechanism at creating plans and sticking to those, whereas I'm much more inclined to be much more spontaneous and sporadic with my planning. So we've worked very hard together to come up with strategies to make sure that we are on the same page.
Yeah, I suppose also another thing is things like short-term memory. So Stacey might ask me to do something, or things around the house that need doing, and unless I write them down or kind of come up with a plan, then they'll just go from my memory. And it's not that I'm trying to not do them or anything, it's just that it kind of doesn't really stick, and it doesn't really remember in my short-term memory. And sometimes she'll mention it, and then you'll kind of get a little bit of a, oh yeah, that was something you mentioned, but if you hadn't mentioned it, then I really wouldn't know. But the organisation thing, I think that's coming up with like lots of different mechanisms that you come up with over time. So my big thing is, writing everything down, writing schedules and plans, so that I don't have to hold things in my head, and that really helps me kind of like make sure that all my thoughts are somewhere, because I can't always hold them all in my head, really.
Yeah, and that's a good example of her making excuses for doing the chores, basically.
It's a bit harsh.
And then the final question is, are there any benefits of being in a dyslexic relationship? Do you want to go first?
Well, I think that, as you said, our dyslexia presents itself in very different ways. So we basically kind of complement each other in the ways that our dyslexia presents itself, but also sharing dyslexia with someone means that you both have spent so long kind of coming up with these mechanisms that, we can share these mechanisms and these ways of working with each other, and be like, oh, have you tried this? And oh yeah, that's a really good idea. Or oh, have you thought about it in this way? And that comes up kind of in our personal life and in our work life. Especially since we've all been working at home, we've had a lot more insight into how each other works. So we've been able to kind of really share those experiences, because we've got a wealth of knowledge over the 30 odd years that we've been dealing with dyslexia.
Yeah, and I can echo that sort of shared sense of experience, and really when you're understood, it makes a huge difference to you as an individual to not feel so alone in something. So the fact we're both dyslexic, it is really reassuring that if I do have moments of brain blips, that Madison sort of can relate to that, and we can work them out together. There's also that sense for me of that sort of complementing each other so well, because our dyslexia does present in different ways, so almost like we have completely different personalities. Not all dyslexics are the same, but that sort of yin-yang works really well together. And Madison, I said in our wedding speech, Madison is the lines to my colours, without which there'd be no pictures, and I think that's a really good representation of our relationship. So Madison sort of enforces even this calendar that we share to keep our life really planned out, which really helps me. But then also I sort of inject lots of ideas and into our relationship, and also into sort of professional brainstorming sometimes. So I like to come up with wacky and fun things that we can do together, and potentially to do in work and beyond as well. So it